Hi, this is Barbara from Second Wind EB-5, and in today's video, we're going to discuss what the typical EB-5 project structure looks like. And we're going to do it together with Greg Bryant, who is Director for Business Development in Asia in one of the strongest regional centers in EB-5. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Barbara, thank you. Thank you for your kind words and introduction. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss some issues that really affect all EB-5 investors, especially in the due diligence process as they're starting to understand the process and projects that they may be investing in. So thank you so much for your time today and the invitation.
Thank you. So one of the most common questions I hear from EB-5 investors: where do I invest my money? Do I invest it into the regional center, if there is some government fund where I put my money in, or do they go directly to the project? In order to explain how things going, actually, what's happening with the funds, you need to understand the project structure first. And Greg, try to explain it in simple words. How does it work and what the typical structure in EB-5 world is?
So those are great questions. And I think that there are a lot of different projects out on the market today in the EB-5 world. Probably the majority, about 90% of those, would be focused on real estate and real estate development. So we at Golden Gate Global also focus only on real estate development. That is our expertise. We have a total of 50 plus years of experience in this sector. So we focus on traditional real estate development projects, and usually they have a residential component connected to that. Now, if you just look at a normal capital stack or financing structure for a real estate development project in the US, you will see something similar to what Varvara you've shared on the screen here, with a bank loan of 50 to 60%, or around 50%, sometimes less. Then you'll have developers' equity, that's cash or investments from the developer. And then there will be some other form of capital coming in, either in preferred equity or in a mezzanine loan position to fill out the rest of the capital stack. And so usually that mezzanine or preferred equity part of the capital stack will be between 20 and 30%. Again, this is primarily because since 2008, 2009, the financial crisis, the regulations on how much banks can lend to real estate developers in the US has become more restrictive. In the past, the LTV or LTC percentages were much higher. The banks could loan much more, whereas in today's world, the banks really usually never loan more than 50 to 60% of the total cost of a real estate development project. So what that's done is it has opened up a market for what are called mezzanine loans, which that's what we primarily do. Some of our projects in the future will also be senior loans, which I'll get to in a minute. But basically, what that does is it allows the EB-5 capital to come in that mezzanine loan part of the capital stack. It allows the EB-5 funds to have collateral in the project, which will be paid off after the bank loan is paid off at the end of the investment process. But basically, the EB-5 capital, it usually fits into that section of the capital stack. Now, there are some projects out there that will do an equity play or preferred equity. Again, those are, I would say, on the minority side in the market today. However, there are some out there for those with a larger risk appetite. But for most investors who are looking for a very safe investment, the investment will come in at that mezzanine or senior loan level.
Yeah, thank you, Greg, for the explanation how the financing of the project itself is structured. So how actually and where investors transfer their funds when they're ready to invest?
Okay, so what we just described is the project itself, the financing structure for the project itself, and the JCE, which is the job creating entity. Now, in the world of EB-5, you will see a lot of acronyms and a lot of letters and numbers thrown around. I-526E, I-829, JC, NCE. It can be a little bit confusing, especially if you're not familiar with how EB-5 works. But in the simplest terms, I think you can understand the investment process from an EB-5 investor's perspective by looking at the center of the slide here, the new commercial enterprise. So EB-5 is employment-based fifth category investment. Employment-based, what that means is every EB-5 investment must create jobs in the US economy. Now, how do those jobs actually come about? How are they created? Well, you could make an EB-5 investment in your own business in the United States, create jobs, prove that those jobs were in existence for 2+ years, and you would be fine. However, in the past history of EB-5, most EB-5 investors have found that that is a very difficult and risky process. Therefore, the Regional Center program came about in the early 1990s to basically allow investors to become passive partners in what's called a new commercial enterprise. That is, really, you can understand it as a special purpose entity that is, it's created specifically to pool the investments of multiple EB-5 investors. So maybe 50 or 100 EB-5 investors will become partners or members of this new commercial enterprise, this special purpose entity. And then that entity will either loan the funds from those investors to the developer, which is the JCE, or the job creating entity, or we'll make an equity investment in that entity. And sometimes the NCE actually is the same as the JCE, but in all of our projects, there is a specific distinction between the NCE and the JCE because we want to create the safest projects for our investors. And therefore, an investor comes in, makes an investment in the NCE, and then that investment in turn is by way of a loan. It is loaned to the JCE where the jobs are actually created. Now, at the beginning, you mentioned about the job of the regional center here. The regional center is not where the investment is made. The investment's made into a new commercial enterprise. This is an enterprise that's specifically set up for the receipt pooling of EB-5 funds, and then those funds actually are invested into the project. The regional center comes in as the sponsor of the project, as the manager of this NCE, and is able to, based on USCIS regulated processes, to calculate the jobs that are created. So without the regional center, the job creation would not be able to happen for each individual investor. So the investor, they're not going to be investing into the regional center. The regional center is a third-party entity that is assisting through the entire process to make sure that the investment is managed smoothly and those jobs are created.
You mentioned that money actually go into the project, can go in the project into different formats, but how does investor getting into the new commercial entity? Do they loan money to the entity, or how it's structured from the paperwork?
Great, that's a great question. So USCIS requires that all EB-5 investments be at risk. Now, at risk does not mean risky. It just means it has to be a bona fide investment. It's not a purchase of some sort of immigration benefit. It's an investment into this new commercial entity. So each investor, when they make the investment into the new commercial entity, they become a limited partner or a member of that new commercial entity. So they're making an equity investment in that entity.
So they own a piece in this equity.
That's correct. They own a piece of equity in the NCE. Then that NCE takes those funds and loans them to the project. And that's where the security comes in, even though the investment is at risk, according to USCIS requirements, by investing as an equity investor in the NCE. Once those funds are then lent to the JCE, then that's where the collateral comes into place, and the security of the project, that's where you see the security of the project come about.
Okay, and here, just to clarify, when we talk about the transfer of funds from NCE to JCE, it can be different forms. As Greg mentioned, I just want to outline and make it sure it can be loan, it can be preferred equity, or it can be equity. And it differs from
Yes.
project, from regional center to regional center. And actually, it's different even from project to project, even within one regional center. And when you look at the different projects, you have to make sure you understand on which format a money passed from NCE to JCE. And Greg, you mentioned actually a very great point about the USCIS requirement to have these funds under the risk. And here the question, you kind of answered this question. I just want to make it like clear. When we talk about transfer of funds from investor to NCE, can be here any guarantees of repayment in place? And the same when you're transferring funds from NCE to JCE, can be here any guarantees of repayment? Because from one side, USCIS requirements to transfer funds at risk requirement, but at the same time, you can see a lot of different projects which actually saying that they have a repayment guarantee and things like this. So can you please cover this part?
Sure. So I think that when you're talking about guarantees, we at Golden Gate Global, we're always wanting to be erring on or maybe standing on the side of conservatancy, being conservative basically in the way we navigate the process for our EB-5 investors. So when it comes to a guarantee, the guarantee that we always have in all of our projects is a denial repayment guarantee, which is, I think, pretty important for investors who are worried about the fact that, say, a year or 2 years down the road, if their EB-5 petition, their I-526E, runs into trouble because of source of funds issues or other issues, that they may be denied. And in that case, then we have a guarantee in place to repay those funds that is backed up by the developer. Whereas I think that some of the other repayment guarantees you're mentioning, I think when you look actually down below, look under the hood of how those guarantees are structured, they cannot be a complete guarantee of the repayment of funds. Otherwise, again, it would not be in line with USCIS's requirements. But again, in all of our projects to date, we have always taken the strategy of creating the safest possible investment structure. And based on that structure and based on that strategy, we have repaid 100% of all of our investors on time and in full. We've never had any late payments, partial payments. We've always repaid those investors on time and in the full amount. So I think it really comes down to looking at the investment structure. Is there collateral in place that actually backs up the EB-5 investment? Is there a clear time frame for the repayment of funds? And if there is a default, if for some reason there would be a default on the part of the developer, what tools or what legal methods are in place for the investor to be able to recoup their funds in that event? So without saying that the investment is guaranteed to be repaid back for your average investor, we can say with very great certainty that the investment will be repaid as long as the project goes as planned. And if it doesn't go as planned, then we have the tools at our disposal to recoup all the funds for investors. So I think, again, it comes back to the idea that this is an investment. And so although a lot of people, they may desire to have a guaranteed repayment, I think it would be important to look under the hood, look at the actual offering documents, look at the business plan of whichever project that you're going to invest in. And based on your analysis, you can also have third-party analysis, obviously analysis by someone like Varvara and her team, who are very experienced in analyzing EB-5 projects, an outside attorney, outside counsel. All of these are helpful in doing the analysis on the project structure to find the safest project structure available. Because again, at the end of the day, it is an investment that again, it needs to be made in a very careful, methodical, and analytical fashion for the investor, from the investor side. But again, from the project side, we are always there, first of all, to guarantee that if there's any issue with the investor's I-526 or with the actual petition itself, that we will have that investment repayment guarantee in place. And we have a host of other guarantees in place, like completion guarantees for the projects, etc. So I think, again, it's a holistic decision. And I would be aware, at least from my perspective, be aware that not everyone who guarantees that you will be repaid really can back up that guarantee. So it's probably more prudent to really have a deep understanding of how the project itself works and whether or not the project itself, standalone or set aside from EB-5, just as an investment project itself, whether the project is viable, whether it's safe.
Thank you. And if we talk about the repayment, so what would be the typical cash flow in this situation, and how the investors would get their funds back at the end? Does the project pay directly to investors? Again, do they pay to the regional center and the regional center distribute? How it's structured?
That's a great question. So again, remember, like we mentioned earlier, the NCE is the entity that pools the investments of multiple investors and then makes a loan to the JCE, or makes an investment in the JCE, in equity, preferred equity, or as a loan. Now, when it comes to the end of the loan term, for example, that's one of the reasons why we like to work with fixed loan terms, because there's a fixed date when, for example, 3 years, we have a project that is 3 years plus two 1-year extensions, another project with a 2-year investment term with 2 1-year extensions. So either at the 4-year or 5-year point, when that investor's loan tranche is up for repayment, then the repayment comes from the JCE back to the NCE, and then from the NCE to the investor. It's the same process, just in reverse, and the investment funds come back in one lump sum to the investor.
Okay, great. And in this positive point, how investors get their funds back, I want to say thank you, Greg, for your time and answers to my questions.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you, Varvara.
Thank you. And I hope this video was helpful and interesting. And if you want to learn more about EB-5, please check our previous videos on our YouTube channel and hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.